So I will be presenting our next speaker today, Judy Newland. So she's a retired faculty in museum anthropology at Arizona State University, where she served as a director of the Museum of Anthropology. Judy has been a weaver, a spinner, and a dyer for over 4 years. Her research includes archaeological textile fieldwork in Peru, weaving in Southwest United States, and indigo dye processes and cultural practices all around the world. So in this talk, she will explore art, society, politics, religion, and more by making connections through textiles, time, and between cultures. So Judy likes to call herself a maker, a mender, and a mother, and I really think that's the perfect phrase to describe her. So thank you, Judy.
Okay, hi, everybody. I, too, would personally like to acknowledge the indigenous people who have cared for this land since time immemorial. I have been privileged to live in this place. Two different times, so Colorado has often been a home to me. I want to dedicate my talk today to my dear friend, Donna Brown. Some of you know her. I have known Donna since her oldest son and my youngest son were at Fairview High in Boulder way back. And Donna was, of course, the band mom, taking care of everybody. I can't tell you her story today about creating the dye garden at Chatfield Farms, but there are probably many people in this group who can, so you should seek them out and talk to them. I got to be a small part of that when I lived here, and I encourage you to visit Chatfield. I know that the garden's not planted yet, but it's still a beautiful place if you have a chance. So here we go on my talk that is the meaning of textiles through time and place, but I did this a lot over COVID online with people, and it was kind of weird because it ended up feeling like this is just Judy's magical mystery tour. You know? So now you can guess how old I am, right? And then we all have a story in cloth, okay? And this is my story, okay? It's just one story. I am a retired anthropology professor, museum anthropology specifically, and a textile historian, but that's just part of the story. I will share with you how and why textiles have been the fabric of my life through time and place, and why that is so important to me. Okay. Oh, wait, I gotta look back there. Okay.
Judy, pull the microphone closer to you.
Okay, let me see if I can. I could talk louder, do better? Okay, all right. All right. So we have an itinerary for the Magical Mystery Tour, so you know where we're going, right? And since I can't read it, okay. Who am I? We're going to talk about material culture, which is one of my favorite subjects. Museum anthropology, what is that, right? Life as landscape, which this kind of describes me as a person. And then there will be examples from all these different areas that we can talk about. So if you want to know where I live now, I have lived all over the place, but I'm currently in Blaine, and I will not say Wisconsin. Where did that come from last night? Okay, Blaine, Washington. It is in the furthest northwest corner of this country, right before you go to Canada. So I live on the Canadian border. I, at one point, was 2 blocks from the Canadian border, and you better be careful that you didn't walk over the border. And you can see we have a lot of water. It's wonderful. It's a huge inspiration to me. And also we have Mount Baker not that far away either. So a fun and wonderful place. So that's where I am from. And I want to mention this now because wasn't really in my talk. We have a group going in Blaine now called Cauldrons of Color. You can find us on Instagram. It's a natural dye group of just all kinds of people. An article just came out in Surface Design about our group. So that is what I do now. Okay?
What's the name of it?
Cauldrons of Color. Cauldrons, you know? Cooking up color. Okay. Okay, so Rocio told you, maker, mother, mender, those are the three words that I that I think describe me best. Why a maker? I've always been a maker. I started sewing at 9 on a treadle sewing machine, and I did other stuff before that, but, and again, I never wanted to jump into the art and craft divide myself. Although I was an art curator for 7 years, I don't go there. It just makes me crazy. I prefer maker to artist, so that's me as a maker. I always mention being a mom because it has completely shaped who I am. I have 3 sons, 9 grandkids, 6 of whom are sons, so, or boys. So it shapes who you are. If you're a mom, you know that. Otherwise, forget it. And a mender, okay, that comes from growing up on a farm in Iowa, where everything was, back in the day, reused, recycled, repaired, and mended, and that's who I still want to be, is a mender. Also fortunate to travel much of the world, has influenced this idea of mending between people and countries, not just fabrics. Okay. This is just a word cloud of all the things we could touch on today. For me, there are no textiles without cultural influence. We don't make stuff or create anything in a vacuum. So this talk explores all of those influences. To be human is to be involved with thread and cloth. Cloth in some form has been around since the beginning of time, and we all continue the thread in one way or another, as with our meeting right here. So we'll be digging into that. Okay. All right, so here's my material culture thing. I like to call material culture the stuff we make makes us, okay? It's stuff, right? It's one of my favorite subjects because I study stuff and I make stuff, and in museums, we study stuff, right? So that's the simple definition of material culture. Next one. Okay, this is the tiny lecture on material culture because you might be like, okay, that's stuff, but what does it mean? Another good definition is the part of culture that takes material form or the study of things. It includes artifacts made by humans, not specimens unless they've been shaped by humans. Material culture is interdisciplinary. It is a discipline in academia, and it crosses art history, design, anthropology, history, folklore, museums, and more. It's all material culture based. In recent years, the study of material culture and things have regained a central position in academia, and particularly strong work is still being done by archaeologists in the UK. If you've ever read Tim Ingold or go seek him out, he writes really well and just fascinating stuff on material culture. He's a UK archaeologist. In museums and academic research, artifactual evidence is considered primary evidence, just as good as writing, right? Artifacts are tools as well as signals, signs, and symbols about culture. So Kingery also wrote a lot of material culture, and I really like his definition too. We're almost done with the lecture. The things that humankind makes and uses at any particular time and place are probably the truest representation we have of the values and meaning of our society. So that's why we're going to study stuff, okay? Okay, the lives of objects. Okay, one of the tenets of material culture is that objects have lives. And a lot of people are like, what? I don't get that. But it is, I love this part of it. The objects that we keep around us have layers of meaning, right? Maybe just to those close to us. For example, quilts and souvenirs. Objects can speak to these questions. Who are you? Who are you connected to? And where are you in history? Okay, that's pretty cool. They change identity over time and place. It's a different way to look at objects. Museum collections and our own art and craft projects As time passes, they are mended, they're traded, they get repaired in museums, they get recycled, they travel from maker to market, to home and back again, and they carry the hand of the maker, and they tell us stories if we will listen. Okay. So this piece, sometimes I like to bring it with me so people can hang it around and look at it. It is from Cross River, Nigeria, well, actually between Nigeria and Cambodia and Cameroon. And this has a story. This is kind of part of my story, but it has a story to tell. And so let's go forward one, just in case you want to see where Cameroon and Nigeria cross there. This is where that textile came from. So we can go back. Okay, look at the textile. This is from the Leopard Society of this area. And you can see a leopard, but all of the other animals and things in there are also part of this Leopard Society, which was very powerful, which I did not know until one day at ASU, the new undergrad academic advisor guy named Bate, who was from Cameroon, finally got to my side of the building and walked around the corner. I had this hanging over my desk, right? It's very cool. And he just was like, very powerful piece, very powerful piece. And I'm like, oh, okay. You know, I knew he was from Cameroon. We had this discussion. And so he told me about it. And I said, do you think, I mean, should I not have it hanging up? It's like, you know, sacred? Or he's like, no, it just surprised me coming around the corner and seeing it there. So that textile traveled from this area to Logan Museum of Anthropology, where I used to work at Beloit College, and it had a little, people went every summer, a couple, bought stuff from markets in Africa, brought them back. I bought this piece. I was the only one who bought all the textiles. And have been carrying it around, and so that was its story. I'm part of its story. Bate's part of its story. And I think the end of the story will be if I can ever find somebody who has a connection back to Cameroon, that it will go back there. We'll see. So that's the lives of objects. Okay. Okay, also traveling textiles, different meanings in different cultures. This was from an exhibit we did at ASU. One of my colleagues had all of these trade textiles. And what we can learn from these traveling textiles is a lot of things. They mean different things in different cultures. And also, this exhibit means a lot of things to different visitors who come to your museum. Some of them related to some of these textiles because of their backgrounds related. But okay, let's go to the next one. Some of the things that, you know, different cultures looked at textiles in different ways. I'm not sure how well you can read this, but medieval Islamic society, utilitarian household furnishings, Indonesia, Malaysia, ritual, symbolic functions, dress, gift exchange, decoration of religious spaces and ancestors. Thailand, reserved for court, distributed according to rank, social stratification, that's a very common way to use textiles in cultures. In Japan, desire for the exotic. Those are just some of the examples. Okay, so that was our little thing on material culture. So now what is museum anthropology? Because that's basically, it's part of cultural, but my kids would be like, what is it that you do, Mom? And my answer to them was always, we study ourselves, which in a way is true. How are we working with our communities and with our people to make our exhibitions? Okay, so back. This is an exhibit I did at Colorado, Boulder Museum, after I'd moved to ASU, so it was curating from afar. But an exhibit, you have to remember this too, it's one view, one story. So whoever puts the story together, it's that story. It doesn't mean it doesn't have another story, because it does. So that's just good to keep in mind. The complex stories, who gets to contribute to the story? Who are the stakeholders? Are we transparent in presenting our work to the public. That is museum anthropology. That is our charge, okay? Do we tell visitors what we are doing? So my example of that, at ASU, the Anthro Museum is in the School of Human Evolution and Social Change, so this big building. You come in the front door, it's all glass, so you can see directly into the museum. The person who was there before me had like these massive theater curtains that covered all of the glass up so that when they were making their exhibits, no one could see, right? And then it would be like, open them up, ta-da, you know, it's all done. I get it, it's very cool. But that's not transparency. So we took the curtains away. I don't know where they went. But then when people are coming into the building, any people, they can see in and what you're doing. And if we were doing something, when we were creating exhibits, I let people come in. The door was locked, but if they're like looking around like, they came in, they could see us hanging labels, they could see what we were doing. They loved it more than the exhibit. So that's transparency, and that was just the fun of the job, partly because it was a museum with all glass, you know. So that's part of museum anthropology. And again, let's see, can you go back one? No, I'm sorry, this one. Okay, so when I was working on that exhibit, the woman in the picture is Melanie Yazzie. She's an art professor in Boulder. Her grandmother's a Navajo weaver, Ganado, I think. Is that right, Ann? Do you know? Anyway. And so Melanie was my sidekick. We went through all of the exhibits that were put into this 1 year long exhibition, 4 months, 3 iterations, 4 months each of different things. And there was one piece in there that was by her grandmother in the collection, so that was super cool. But the interesting story about going through the pieces is that you're opening pieces up in the collections room, and we opened one up, and kind of like Bate, Melanie's like, no, it had a snake on it, okay? Not gonna put that out in public. It was just like, no. I'm like, well, would I have known that? Probably not. So we need our stakeholders, we need our helpers. And then the other thing that happened is CU Boulder has a very nice collection of sand painting textiles that are based on sand paintings. Some people want to see those, some people don't. And her solution was that we don't put any in the exhibit, the big exhibit, because people could come in and be surprised, just like Bate was coming to my office. But we would do a special program, and everybody would know this is when you can come and see these sand painting rugs, textiles. So again, I needed Melanie and all of the other people to help me get this right. Okay, yeah, so, and then this is a Judy James. Some of you might know Michael James, the quilter, okay? I also have a degree from University of Nebraska-Lincoln, and Michael was one of my major professors, and his wife was there. Judy did fabulous work. And so I did an exhibit when I moved to Beloit College of her work, and her work is, they went back and forth from the East Coast to Nebraska, looking out airplane windows, which no one does anymore. You know that? Right? No, everyone's looking at their screen. And so it's just pieces, you can't see them very well, of what she's seen as we're flying. And so I loved her work, so I just did a whole exhibit of it. And Michael was like, this is the best exhibit of her work ever. So I'm like, well, okay, fine. And then also at Beloit College, we had a really big collection of Chinese imperial robes. And they were donated way, way back by somebody who lived in China and brought them back. They used to wear these to the openings, okay, back in the day, because they were and they'd been shown way too much. One side would be faded, the others were fine. And then I don't remember who told me the story about the people wearing them to the openings. I'm like, okay, these things happened, not anymore, all right? So this is just the kind of things that I worked with, and because this is partly about telling stories, I have to tell one more story that is just so cool, especially after hearing Linda talk and how lovely it is for all of us to collaborate and work together. When I did this exhibit, I was going back and forth between Tempe, Arizona, and Colorado. And in the third iteration of the exhibit, there are always some pieces that aren't identified, right? And so I'm sitting at my desk at ASU, and Melanie calls me, and she's just like almost hysterically excited and almost crying and whatever. And she's like, Judy, my uncle is here. He thinks that 2 more of these pieces in this exhibit are from my grandma. And here he is. So I'm like talking to Melanie's uncle. All of a sudden, he's like, here's why I think that my mom wove these. And he explained it all to me, and then we all had this great, Melanie was in tears. She was so excited. So good things can happen by getting these things out there on exhibition, even though they're maker unknown. Now we have 2 more pieces that we know the maker. And I told her, go immediately to the collection manager and tell her all of this stuff that you just told me, right? She's the one who's gonna help fix it. So that's another Melanie story. Okay, so this is Kenyon Deshay, and we just heard about that. Spider Rock, beautiful story of Spider Woman. I took this. I've been there multiple times when I lived down in the Southwest. The landscape is another huge thing that is part of my life. I have lived in a lot of places, and from the little, we're gonna go through that in a minute. Let me just finish this one. I have a great affinity for this beautiful land. I've been able to study with several Navajo weavers, Pearl Sunrise, Sarah Natani, other people over the years. And it's a cultural exchange, right? It's just the most wonderful way to get to know people. So that brings this landscape, so close to you. Okay, so now we'll go on the little landscape tour, okay? Why is Judy just in the land? I did grow up on a farm in Iowa. And that's a beautiful sunset across from my dad's farm. And that is me, if you can see that little black and white picture. I was standing in the cornfield drinking a Pepsi. We never got Pepsi. I'm like, so I guess that was the special thing. I still can't believe how tall the corn is. I was like 7 or 8. I was not some teeny kid. I'm like, wow, okay, so Iowa is where the tall corn grows. But because I was a farm kid, I still think of myself, I'm a farm kid. I'm just still that kid in the black dirt in Iowa. And so I think that has proceeded my traveling to try to always be grounded wherever I went. So quickly, next one, Eastern Washington. Some of you might not know that southeastern Washington state is a desert. It's called the Channeled Scablands, and geologists come from all over the world to study it. So it's a bit of an odd place, because you don't think about Washington as being that way. It's a desert. 6 to 9 inches of rain a year, that's less than Arizona. I was there 25 years. That's where I raised my boys. And it became this very special place. It's kind of stark, and it's beautiful. So that was the first thing. Then I went to Colorado the first time, did grad school. Then the upper photo is Wisconsin. That is the Beloit College Logan Museum of Anthropology. I actually ran the art museum at the time, but we did all kinds of stuff together. Okay, next. And then I went back to Colorado, but in between Arizona. This is a place, I was telling somebody earlier, I do not like hot weather. I could live in 60 degrees all the time. My son and I were like, yeah. So Arizona was a challenge, but it is an amazing place. This landscape, it just somehow totally got to me. The plants, everything. I spent so much time, if I wasn't working on the weekend, I was out in the desert. There are dye plants together, smell of creosote. I just loved it, and it was just grounded me there so that I could do my work. It's like your meditation, right? So you can just see, let's go back one, what the landscape looks like. I'm gonna come back and talk about that little backpack thing later. Okay, thanks. Next one. Eucalyptus, so the silver dollar eucalyptus, which are the round eucalyptus leaves, there was a beautiful tree on campus, and so that's where I got all my eucalyptus. That's all eucalyptus on silk and wool, just collaged together. And that was just, go out, collect, whatever. Sorry to say that they cut that tree down. I don't know why. Campus is very different than when I was there. So something about that desert inspired me and just pulled me out there all the time. Okay, let's go next. Oh, okay. I did a lot of hiking, a lot of exploring. This is a little piece that I made after I left Arizona, went back to Colorado, here again. And this one I'd like to read what this means. The Sonoran Desert is the inspiration, my inspiration for this small work of art. This unique desert holds many secrets, delightful and dark. Native desert plants yield dye colors to explore and appreciate, while border crossings require thoughtful soul searching. While delivering water to hidden stations in Organ Pipe National Monument, which is now illegal, I found scraps of cloth, often found scraps of cloth left behind, sometimes entire blankets, which I used to create little art pieces in honor of the missing. So these tiny wool bundles in this piece represent the souls lost in the vastness of the Sonoran Desert, Mexico, or wrapped in they are the disappeared, the desperate, the forgotten ones. Wrapped in the colors of the Southwest, Mexico, and Central America, some bundles are tied, some are loose, some show wear and tear from a dangerous crossing. How many are lost in this mesmerizing world of heat and beauty, we'll never know. But they are now profoundly anchored to this landmark and the threads in the social fabric of our lives. So this is material culture and landscape to me. Okay. So this is my point. Material culture and landscape have shaped my identity. That's all we need to see about that. So there's a little bit here, this being based in landscape and material culture, this is why when I think about how textiles are embedded in culture, and there's no art without culture. Social practice art projects, I counted up and I've now done like at least 10 of them. They're like public participation, some of you know what they are. They usually have some kind of a social cause. So that quilt one in the middle, that was the first social practice project that Ann Morton did in Phoenix. Hundreds and hundreds of quilters, 2 of my students and I made that quilt that you see. They were all gathered, they were in the Phoenix Art Museum, and then they were gathered in a giant parking lot in Phoenix to photograph them and appreciate all the work that all of these people, we don't know each other, came together to do this, and then all of the blankets went to indigenous groups and the homeless. So that's kind of what a social practice, socially embedded work is. And on the right, that is me at the water stations in Organ Pipe National Monument, and the blanket that I found, which the guy said, you should just take that with you. Nobody ever finds anything. So, which I later, it was covered with cactus spines and dirty and everything. So I just took it, I kept it, and there's a pair of sunglasses with it, so someone left that behind in whatever circumstance, right? I later cut it up, cleaned it up, cut it up, made it into that backpack, filled it up with water, and took it back out in the desert. That was my own tiny social practice project. And the piece on the left, that's just the indigo girl. I make these really collage tall, they're 7 feet tall people or whatever they are. Okay. And quilts and community, again, how much community is created with our textiles. It's not just quilts, but you know that they are a community thing. So the one on the far right, my students at Beloit College made in a class that we demanded they let us teach about anthropology and actual experiential learning. So we learned about cultures, and then they made something, or they learned to spin, or they did this or that. And we started with quilts, the Amana colonies and the quilts, and what does all this mean to us? And so this group of maybe 12 or 15 students, it was a small class, there was a quilter. One of the girls was a quilter, and her mom was a quilter, so she kind of took the lead. But I had several, young men, and a lot of people who'd never sewed before ever, and they ended up making this quilt together. And then we gave it to our mentor, who was a retired professor's wife on campus. So the community that was created with that stitching and whatever, it's that kind of wonderful thing. And then in the back, that is Judy Chicago honor quilt. There were like almost 500 of those triangles. It was a social practice project. It's old, right? That was put together. They're at the University of Louisville, and my friend Maggie Leininger, some of you know her, asked me to please come down and help with the install. And so we installed them in all these different shapes and whatever. So at some point, you got to see them all together, and they're from all over the world. So very cool. Okay. And then, again, museum in Hawaii, looking at the feathered work of the indigenous Hawaiians, learning about things through textiles. And then the other picture is, that's Mehmet. He's from Turkey. He's been here off and on teaching felting, major felting, just a super fun guy. So just more, these kind of experiences are just so meaningful to me, and I know to a lot of you as well. Okay. Okay, so now just briefly, we'll go, what are all the things that textiles can tell us besides, their beautiful weavings and all that? There's a whole science and math thing, and some of you probably know about kipu. Beautiful, almost art projects, but they're a method of communication that was, and counting, used in the Quechua language. Well, in the Quechua language, kipu means no. No, okay. It usually consisted of cotton or camelid fiber strings. The Inca people used them for collecting data, keeping records, monitoring tax obligations, properly collecting census records, calendrical information, and for military organization. That's a lot of stuff, right? Archaeologists are now suggesting that authors actually used the kipu to compose and preserve epic poems and legends. Because there are relatively few words in Quechua, they could also be used as pronunciation keys on the chords. So amazing stuff, okay? This is textiles and science. Okay. And more math. I don't know, I'm not kind of a terrible knitter, but I'm always trying to get better. So I thought I would get this book on sequence knitting because it was put together by a mathematician who came up with this method of patterns just based on this like over and over repeats. It's kind of cool. I don't know if any of you have seen it. And then, so the other one is weaving a tale of strange weather. Basket weaving and astronomy may seem like strange bedfellows, but this is Nathali Maibach's work. It's evidence that it's also a beautiful duo, right? Using climate change data in her work, she assigns colors and shapes to variables like temperature and wind strength. In this piece, each pair of vertical spokes is assigned an hour of the day. The green round reed is twilight data. The yellow flat reed is sun data. The red and orange sticks are high and low tide readings, and the blue balls are the number of whales sighted at the particular day and hour, and so on. So she just put all that data together as a math person and created this amazing sculpture. I love it. Okay, next. And just a little bit more. I think a lot of you are familiar with the crocheted coral wreaths, but this stuff is all based on math. And then there's actually a book. I got this from my ex-husband. He's a mathematician. Hyperbolics. He's way into hyperbolics, so I got him the hyperbolic geometry. You can crochet it. He never did, but okay. Okay, so a bit of an explorer through the world of indigo. I've done indigo for a long time. But I love it because there's so much science in that dye pot. It's so fun to teach kids. My oldest grandson near me is now 13, but maybe 10 years ago, he's been around me since 3. He knows dyeing, right? But not the sciencey stuff. And so I was explaining pH to him in relation to indigo. And he's just like, "Mom, Grandma, that's kind of like science." I'm like, yes, it is. That's what we do. So I love, the world of indigo has science, politics, social status, growing, and history. And so we'll just briefly zip through these next stories. This is what indigo is. It's been around a long time, millennia. I think the most important thing here is it is used for all of these things. It did occur independently around the world. It didn't start in one place. There's different plants, so it, many, many cultures use indigo in very different ways. So another little story. This is Gasali Adeyemo. Some of you probably know him. He lives in Santa Fe, but he's Nigerian. And he's just the most wonderful man. He came here and did a workshop. We had so much fun. Learning traditional techniques. His family still does all of this, dyeing and stuff in Nigeria, and things go back and forth. But I want to tell you his story, because there is a blog. It's on both the Rocky Mountain Weavers Guild site, it might still be up there, and the Dye Garden site, a blog that I wrote about this. But here's part of it. Gasali's story stretches across continents and cultures and now surrounded us in Colorado, and we are now part of the story. So where do we go from here? Can we heed Gasali's motto and share the knowledge, which is his wonderful thing? This knowledge belongs to all of us. We don't own it, right? We share it. And what about that man who could be king in Gasali's village, Oviedo, meaning little village? And what about, so in that village, 3 families rotate the responsibility of caring for the community through kingship. So if Gasali returns to Nigeria, which I think he plans to when his kids get bigger, he could someday serve in the role of king. So I titled this blog, The Man Who Could Be King, and people are like, what are you talking about? Because not everybody got to hear that story, right? So I just thought that was so cool. He's such a fabulous guy. And so our friend may one day lead his village into a brave new future, sharing his message of love and the spirit of indigo with the world. It's so cool. Okay, next one. This is Grace's story. Some of you who would have been with us in El Salvador will know this part of the story, which is, to me, it's a family saga, but it's politics. Her grandfather owned a bunch of land in El Salvador. When this Civil War started, they moved, I think, to Boston. The whole family, she was small, and they lived there. She speaks perfect English, and her husband's French, and Spanish and everything. And so when we were there, I think she'd only been back a few years. Do you remember? Yeah. She had found out, so the co-ops, it didn't work. The farming didn't work, right? That the land was for sale. And so she was able to go back and buy, not all of it, but most of the land that had belonged to her grandfather. Fixed up the hacienda, started an indigo plantation. And so we got to visit that in 2007 on Deb's trip. It's like, yeah, awesome. And it was just, to me, I'm like, that's the political story that is related to dyeing and textiles. It's all there. And a happy ending, at least for now, right? Okay, and this, I'm also a historian and an archaeologist. This is the oldest piece of indigo fabric ever found so far, 6,200 years old. Of course, it was from Peru, Huaca Prieta, which I have gotten to visit, but I didn't find this piece. And so this was published in 2016, and the interesting thing is that's not when they found this. This has probably been sitting in museum collections for who knows how long, because most archaeologists want to look at ceramics, right? That's the important thing. So the textiles sometimes get down to the bottom of the pile. So this was, I thought, super exciting when they came up with this. So it's old stuff, okay? All right. Okay, I grew indigo in Colorado. I also grew woad. Don't tell anyone, okay? I'm going to talk about that. Japanese indigo, grows there. I also grow it in Washington State now. It's a beautiful plant. And let's see, I don't really have that much to say. But gardening with dye plants, this is part of what my group is doing now in Blaine. A lot of us raise plants, we just share, we just make stuff and have a lot of fun. There's both science, but there's also those social aspects that can bring us together. It's what I love. So next, this is just more coreopsis, indigo, okay? And these are there are, from what I know, more than 300 species of indigo in the world, of which 12 to 15 can be used for dyeing. And these are the main ones that we see: India, a couple in Africa, Fruticosa down in the southwest or southeast, and in Guatemala and so forth. So pretty interesting. And what I think a lot about plants. Again, it's like me and the farm girl, right? And do things make people? Or do people make things, right? Does the landscape make people? If you've ever read The Botany of Desire, that's a really old book now, right? Are plants affecting our behavior by the way they grow instead of the opposite? I don't know, but they could be. How do plants influence people? If you have not read Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer, you need to read it. It is my favorite book. Indigenous Wisdom, Scientific Knowledge, and the Teaching of Plants. Super fantastic. Okay, now we will go to woad. Oh, no, wait, fresh leaf indigo, sorry. If you want to just grow a tiny bit of Japanese indigo and you're not going to have a huge crop, you can still harvest it and do fresh leaf indigo and get this color on silk. Okay? It's a lot of fun. Okay. Okay, woad by any other name. Woad, there's an entire history in woad. It's French blue, right? It's European indigo. I grew it in Colorado. To be part of that history, I got to understand the plant, despite the fact that in Colorado and in Washington State, it's a Class A invasive species. Now, if you're a gardener, you know that's not necessarily a problem. Woad is a biennial. At the end of the first year, you harvest the leaves to make the best color. It's only in the second year, if it goes to seed, that you're in trouble. So, you know, I still grew it. And as a matter of fact, the guy in Boulder County who was the invasive plant person got a plant from me before I left because he wanted to put it in the demonstration garden and to tell people about it. So, you know, I'm not going to tell you to grow woad. It's the eastern prairies. Both in eastern Washington is dry. Eastern Colorado is dry. That's where it gets away from people and its problem. So it is a problem. Okay. And just a little, I did not grow this. My friend, I left Colorado and gave her plants, and they grew fantastically. And I had told her, this is the first year, she cut all the flowers and stuff off. And she dyed that tablecloth with woad. I have never gotten anything that beautiful. So she just sent me those, so I just threw them in there. Yeah. Okay. Cultural cloth, I mean, I've been a few places, and I've been really lucky to work in Peru as kind of a textile archaeologist. So this is from the Chiribaya culture, which nobody knows about. It was right before the Inca, southern Peru. And so this is probably cochineal, but it could be relbunium, which is a plant that grows there that makes red. You don't know unless you test it in a lab. And also indigo and various other plant colors. In these ancient pieces, they're like from 700 to 1300. That's their time frame. All natural dyes, and I'm going to show you a few slides here. I don't know if Linda's still here. She might not want to watch this. Yeah. Because in Peru, all of these textiles are coming from graves. They're grave goods, right? And, yeah. So this is some of the work. I had students I took down. We're doing conservation work on pieces already in museums, but that's what it looks like when you're on site. All of the textiles and the bones are on top of the surface because the looters are after the ceramics. So it can be kind of really difficult for people, but we would be collecting the textiles off the surface to then figure out what we were, going to start storing them safely and whatever. The lower right, that's the archaeologist that ran our camp one summer. That is a baby mummy. He was going to open it up. I'm like, yeah, whatever. Okay. Okay. There's a little bit more. There are issues, obviously everywhere, issues there with, seeing this stuff all over the place. Looting is a problem. And who mentioned collectors? This is the people who collect these things are really the ones causing the problems, right? I used to tell my students, I'm like, this isn't black and white. If somebody, a native Quechuan or Aymara person, finds a pot and can sell it and feed their family for a year, is that all wrong? It's a very difficult thing, but there are all kinds of people out there looting antiquities, but by far the collectors are the biggest problem. In the top right, that's me and Rosa's telling me how to use the backstrap loom down there in Peru. And she is the textile conservator at a museum in Ilo, which is like 40 miles from the Chilean border. And right before we got there, summer of 2009, they had like 16 of their very best textiles stolen from the museum, and they blamed her. Well, of course it wasn't her, right? It was probably somebody getting in through security, whatever. It's a problem, it's sad, but it was beautiful work, and I'm really thankful that I got to do it. Okay. And more cultural sharing, again, that's me and Rosa. And then Window Rock on the Navajo Reservation, getting to spend with some lovely people. Me sitting in the ASU Museum with a couple little boys. I'm sure I'm trying to teach them about weaving. Okay. This is Oaxaca. Some of you were also there. These two young ladies came over from Chiapas. Really neat people to meet. We did a lot of fun with the dye people there. But for me, these pictures are just like, this is how we share culture. This is how I share culture, through cloth, right? It's a fabulous thing. Okay. And then we all belong and are experience these many co-ops. That was the Guatemala trip. All of that was the Guatemala trip. Yeah. We just went all over. It was fantastic. Thank you, Deborah, for taking us. Okay. And then this was at Beloit College. I invited the monks to come, the Tibetan monks, because they had been at Colorado, and I thought this was so fantastic. So we invited them up there, and they spent a whole week making the sand mandala in the museum, right? And then when they're done, that sand is all swept into a container and goes to water somewhere. And just the beautiful, this is ritual, this is religion. So again, through cloth, it's a pretty fantastic thing. We had an entire exhibit of photographs that went with this piece. So, okay, and this is the last Spinzilla that I was in Denver. Maybe some of you have got to do that. I love that. I went up and took this picture of all the people spinning on wheels and whatever, because it was just such an awesome thing. And so I have just this last story to tell you, or throw in here. The story of melding and the mending of cultures through threads. I just want to leave you with this story, which to me illustrates the connections that we all have through cloth. This piece I'm going to read was on a tapestry list a long time ago, and I don't usually get on lists, so I just feel like it must have been meant to be, It was written by Jehan. His background was Islamic, and he was writing on the subject of spirituality and religion in tapestry weaving. I had been taught by my auntie that the spirit of the ages runs through a single piece of yarn being spun. It may start at your fingers and go onto the wheel or onto your spindle, but the other end connects you to this important link through all of the other people who spin and weave. That is what that tingle at your fingertips that you feel is. It eliminates the need for language, and you will find that spinners of different language groups will spin together and want to exchange the threads that they have spun. And I found this to be true in Peru. So we'll just finish up with one last side. The stuff we make makes us, and it's all a cloth conspiracy. Okay, I don't know if we have questions. I'm going to sit here because I have a new ankle. Okay.
Is it okay if we ask you some questions? All right. For all of our live streamers, just if you need to text or WhatsApp me a question for Judy, you can send that to 1-937-216-4160. And who has a question for Judy? Sorry, 1-937-216-4160.
I should tell you, this is in Flagler College in St. Augustine. I'm sorry. This photo is Flagler College in St. Augustine, Florida. There was an indigo symposium there, I think in 2019. And I was coerced into running the indigo workshop by that woman in the middle, one of my former grad students. And the whole symposium there was about our indigo history in the Southeast, which is all based on slavery. So that's where the photo comes from.
Thank you. All right. Please just say your name and where you're from for anybody watching at home.
I'm Tara Miller from Paonia. I have a project in Taquile Island, Peru, where they don't do a lot of natural dyeing because it's an island and they, limited space for non-food. But eucalyptus, is that the dye, or was that just the theme of the piece?
There might be one up here. I think, this one works too.
Because they do have eucalyptus there in a lot of it.
Those eucalyptus pieces, the orange that you saw on that's the leaves. So that's botanical dyes. And those were also put into a dye bath with eucalyptus leaves, so you get that rust. In order to get the orange, you have to boil those leaves for more than an hour. So it has a super high tannin content, so that's where you're getting the color. But you could use it.
Who else has a question for Joe? Okay.
This is Jan Alexander, and I'm from Fort Collins, Colorado. My questions are two. Where was the photo of Spinzilla? That's one. And two, what are the dimensions of that oldest known indigo dyed piece?
The dimensions of that's just a tiny fragment, like 4 by 4 maybe inch. Yeah. What was your other question? Spinzilla. Where was it? Yeah. Somewhere in Denver. It's at the art museum, I think. Did anybody else go? That might have been. It shut down over COVID, but I think it was at the art museum. Super fun.
All right. Who else has a question? Any more questions for Judy?
Right? Okay.
It's hungry. Are we done? Does anyone else have a question?
You can ask me questions anytime I'm floating around. Yeah, you don't have to.
Okay, cool. I'll hand it back over to Kelsey.
Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you, Judy.